Horse welfare is the greatest challenge facing racing today, and that's not just in this country, that's a worldwide problem. But I'm optimistic that perhaps we're going to start to move forward. My optimism stems from the fact that the racehorse industry has unanimously accepted a strategy on welfare that will take us forward for the next 4 or 5 years. If we look at where we started from when we started this road, it was a pretty impressive starting point. Horse welfare in the racing industry has received a lot of attention over many years. A lot of research has been done, and a lot of people have done an enormous amount of work. But there are shifting goalposts. Welfare moves. 10 years ago, welfare was different to today, and the one thing I know for certain in 10 years' time, it'll be vastly different from what it is now. So we're faced with communicating something that's a moving target. The problem we have is that we don't have any one unifying strategy for the racing industry. Lots of parts of the industry have strategies, but nothing governs the whole of the industry. And so what we need to do is to bring together the whole industry, not just the racing element of it, but the breeding and the aftercare. And the political climate has changed. As Rowley said, people's view is that people no longer see the horse as something they ride, so much as an animal that's a companion, the same as their dog or their cat. Welfare is a very sensitive issue. And you mention to people who have horses about the welfare of their horse, and it's rather like discussing bringing up their children or driving their car. You're walking on very thin ice. People often say the BHA is too close to the racing industry. Others say it's too far away from it. And the BHA, as the regulator, only regulates a very small part of the industry. So they regulate the training and the actual racing. They have no part to play in the regulation of breeding or aftercare. What we need is for welfare to be owned by the whole of the sport. It has to be a tone of engagement, how we talk to people about welfare. Often people talk about welfare and discuss it, trying to make a difficult situation going away. And we have to be positive and discuss how we're talking about welfare. All the racing bodies need to talk together. All the horses in sport, all the different disciplines, we all need to work together because it is the same problem. It's just that racing tends to be the one that's mainly in the spotlight. The Horse Welfare Board was started in April 2019, and it was to get closer cross-industry collaboration. And it was formed not by the BHA, but by the membership body, which takes in all the groups that are affected by the racing industry. And the board that was formed was a cross-industry board, so there are independents on it, such as myself and Tracy Crouch, the ex-minister. But there are 2 members from the Horsemen's Group, a horse trainer and management from the Racecourse Association, 2 from the Racecourse Associations, an owner representative and a track vet, and 2 from the BHA, from the regulatory side of it. And the task was to try and produce a strategy for equine welfare across the whole industry, and a way of trying to communicate that strategy, not only to the whole industry, but to the public and the politicians at large. And we came up with the idea of a life well lived. The purpose and scope of the strategy was to go beyond just racing and taking breeding and aftercare. The whole life of the horse bred for sport. We needed a vision, and our vision is very simple. It's one that I'm sure everybody here could identify with. Respect for the horse is at the heart of everything we do. Every horse bred for racing will enjoy a life well lived. We looked at trying to find as much evidence as we possibly could to make our decisions. We looked at all the research that's been done, and we looked at the various pollings that had been done. Various polls showed that people were losing faith and interest in racing over the last 5 or 6 years because of welfare. Polling showed us that the public were mostly concerned by fatalities on the racecourse and the use of the whip. Whereas when we did polls of the racing industry, and I think it's the first time anybody's done that, The racing industry was very happy with welfare in racing, but was very concerned about the welfare after racing. We decided that we couldn't define welfare, so we would judge it by the outcomes. And we came up with 4 outcomes for welfare. In order to get the 4 outcomes, we had 2 enablers, and that produced the strategy, which has 20 recommendations, and that leads to 20 projects, some of which are already underway. If we look at the 4 outcomes, the first one is best quality of life, best possible quality of life. We could argue that they already receive a good quality of life in training. We would like that to extend to the breeding sector and to the aftercare, so it is quality of life throughout its life. Quality of life also involves euthanasia, and we want an adult conversation to discuss that this is, when it's in the best interest of the horse, this is something that we should be prepared to talk about. We talk about collective lifetime responsibility. In order to have collective lifetime responsibility, we need to know where these horses are. That's why the 30-day registration of foals is a starting point, so we'll be able to find out where these horses go that don't go into training. If we discover there's something we don't see, then the industry needs to do something about it. We need to track where these horses go after racing. We must have 100% identification of the first home a horse goes to when it leaves racing. We must try and improve safety. It is unacceptable to lose horses on the racetrack. We cannot stop losing horses on the racetrack. What we can do is, where it can be avoided, where we can take steps to reduce it, then we need to reduce the number of fallers, and the number of fallers will reduce the number of fatalities. But we need to be open with the public that the sport is a risk sport. There will always be accidents. We need to limit that to the absolute minimum, and we have a lot of work to do there. Things like modifying the fences, visibility so they can see them, altering the hurdles, work that's already underway using information involved from the RSPCA and with the eventers who've already done a lot of work on this. And the 4th welfare thing is trust. And the only way we'll get trust is if we get the first 3 outcomes correct. So we need trust from the industry to trust the welfare board. We need trust of the horse-owning population to trust us in racing, to look after our horses. And we need trust from the public that we're doing everything we can to make sure these horses have a life well lived. The key elements of any welfare is to have strong welfare, effective communication, and robust data. Our 2 enablers are data and statistics, which the Minister's already mentioned this morning. And we would like to have accurate data as to where every horse is, what it's doing, and who is responsible for it. We'd like to have a welfare database so we knew what was actually happening. And then we need the statistical analysis on good data to be able to predict. And the predictive model for jumping that came out of the Cheltenham Review last year should start to produce good evidence for us. As should also the data that we're collecting in terms of welfare. We'd like to be able to monitor and measure welfare. So we could measure it within racing yards, and you could also measure it in every other sort of equine yard. So we have 20 recommendations, and it comes under 6 standards. Standards of benchmarking, standards of safety, review of current policies such as the whip, and we recommend that the changes to the whip, that the penalties for misuse of the whip, as a minimum recommendation from the board, is that these should be increased, the penalties should be increased by October this year, and that we look at all aspects of penalties for the whip, including disqualification. It's totally unacceptable for people to misuse the whip as a welfare rule in racing, and for the punishment not to be behaviour changing. We do not make a recommendation that the whip should be removed or that it should be included. What we do is make a recommendation that the industry should consider a consultation to look at the use of the whip, an open consultation, which all of you are invited to participate. And at the end of this consultation, then we urge the BHA to make a regulation for better use of the whip for encouragement. It doesn't affect the safety. Training and education is at every aspect of racehorse training. So training of breeders, training of after-homers is just the same as it is for the trainers themselves. And finally, communication. It's vital for whatever we're doing, we must tell people what we're doing in a very strong and a very positive way. If we're doing it right, we must tell them that we're doing it right. We must involve people in the industry, the people who are actually looking after the horses, for them to tell their stories, because that's how the public will realize how important the horse is to them and how important the welfare is. And finally, the thing that we would say is that the strategy is a starting point. This is not the end of the line. People are concerned that we haven't implemented the strategy yet in 2 weeks, but we're working on it. But we will be moving forward over the next few years. So it's a live document, and we welcome people's opinions on it. Thank you very much, Chairman.